Hello and welcome back to World 360. You may remember that in December last year, the execution of a Kurdish man in Iran sparked anti-government protests in the Middle Eastern country. The man, Haidar Gurbani, was accused of killing 3 people linked to Iran's elite Revolutionary Guard Corps. And his case garnered so much international attention that 3 months before his execution, the UN urged Iran not to go ahead with the execution. We are seriously concerned that Mr. Gurbani's eventual confession was forced as a result of torture and ill treatment, said the UN. Gurbani's case highlighted the rampant increase in executions in Iran in recent years, a country which carries out the highest number of executions in the world after China. To understand the death penalty in Iran, it's worth looking at the country's penal code. According to the Iranian Islamic Penal Code, or the IPC, murder is punished by qisas, an Islamic term which means retaliation in kind, retributive justice, or simply an eye for an eye. And these are used to punish murder. The state effectively puts the responsibility for executions on the shoulders of the victim's family. The family can do one of 3 things. It can demand a retribution death sentence, blood money or diya instead of a death sentence, or can simply grant forgiveness. Of course, there are many cases in which death sentences are issued by the revolutionary courts in Iran themselves. Now, last week, an annual report released by 2 NGOs, Iran Human Rights, IHRNGO, and Together Against the Death Penalty, or ECPM, revealed that there was a 25% increase in executions in Iran in 2021 compared to 2020. At least 333 people were executed in 2021 compared to 267 in 2020. One thing to note is that in recent years, official data provided by Iran on executions has always been lower than the data unearthed by NGOs. However, in 2021, Iranian authorities announced only 16.5% of executions as compared to an average of 33% in 2018 to 2020. This means that 83.5% of all executions in the 2021 report, or 278 executions in total, were not announced by the authorities. Another major takeaway from this report are that at least 38% of executions were for drug-related charges, compared to about 10% in 2020. The reason this is important is because according to international law, death sentences must only be carried out in cases of serious crime. According to the United Nations Human Rights Committee, in countries which have not abolished the death penalty, capital punishment may be imposed only for the most serious crimes, it being understood that their scope should not go beyond intentional crimes with lethal or extremely grave consequences. Juvenile executions are also explicitly prohibited under international law. However, there were at least 2 such cases in Iran last year. In August 2021, IHRNGO, human rights activist news agency, reported that 3 prisoners were executed in Urmia prison in Iran's West Azerbaijan province, out of which 2 were juveniles. Therefore, these 2 were not publicly executed, whereas the 3rd prisoner was. According to reports, the 2 juveniles were charged with drug offenses. The report also noted that the execution rate in Iran accelerated after the election of Ibrahim Raisi as president in June 2021 and doubled in the second half of 2021 compared to the first half. The report also noted that the number of women and ethnic minorities executed have increased. One woman, Zara Ismaili, suffered a heart attack as she watched several men being executed in front of her as she awaited her turn. The authorities still hanged her lifeless body, the report notes. It's also interesting to note that the rampant rise in executions in Iran comes despite international pressure for the country to double down on its death penalty. In October last year, a UN human rights expert said almost all executions in Iran were quote-unquote an arbitrary deprivation of life. Now, in terms of the forgiveness movement under Kisa's laws and its contribution to limiting the use of the death penalty in Iran, the latest report from IHRNGO and ECPM notes that at least 705 prisoners sentenced to death for murder charges were forgiven by the families of the murder victims. The report also says that in the past 4 years, the forgiveness movement, as it has been known, has grown significantly, aided by former death row inmates who were forgiven live in, celebrities and civil society groups urging people to forgive instead of choosing the death penalty. However, there has been consistent crackdown on this movement through increased pressure and new trumped-up charges for activists and civil society. Before we conclude, I'm sure you're wondering how many executions take place in the world. The top 5 countries are China, Iran, Egypt, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia, according to a report in Amnesty in 2021. On that note, thank you so much for watching. This is Pia Krishnankutty for The Print. Do subscribe to The Print and follow us on social media.